They harmed humanity's favorite alien. The entire human race went to war. The alarm on my wrist screamed before my eyes were even open. I fell out of my bunk, grabbed my jacket, and ran into the hallway where lights were flashing red and every screen on the station showed the same frozen image. My hands were shaking before I even understood why. The image was of Pip. I had known Pip since he was small enough to fit in my 2 hands. He was not human. He came from a species called the Velkarai, and he had been found years ago on a broken ship drifting near Ceres, alone, weak, and unable to speak our language. My crew had pulled him out of that wreck. We fed him, we taught him, we laughed with him. He grew up watching our movies, eating our food, and asking questions about everything, from why the sky on Earth turned orange at sunset, to why dogs wagged their tails when they were happy. He was not just an alien to us anymore, he was family. Now, on every screen I saw him floating inside a containment tank, his skin marked with burns, his 4 eye stalks drooping low, barely able to lift his head. A message scrolled beneath the image, sent from a group called the Thren Council, saying that Pip was being held because he was occupying space they wanted for their own use. They called him cargo. They called him unregistered. They said if we did not hand over the station within 1 day, they would continue what they called encouragement. I did not need to hear more. None of us did. Within minutes, communication channels that had been silent for years suddenly opened. Countries that had argued over borders and treaties for decades were now speaking with one single voice. I stood in the control room and watched leaders from opposite sides of the world appear together on one screen, saying the same words at the same time. There was no argument. There was no hesitation. Every command post on Earth received the same order. Prepare for departure. I was assigned to a ship called the Meridian, alongside a woman named Grace, who had spent the last 10 years training pilots for deep space combat. She did not smile much, but when she looked at the screen showing Pip's condition, her jaw tightened, and she said only one sentence to me. We are not leaving him there. Within a few hours, ships that had never been prepared for battle were being converted right on the docks. Cargo haulers had weapons welded onto their hulls by engineers who had not slept in 2 days. Retired pilots who had not touched a control stick in years volunteered without being asked. A young man named Oliver, who used to work repairing communication satellites, walked straight into the recruitment office and said he wanted to fly, even though he had never flown anything larger than a small aircraft in his life. Nobody forced anyone to go. Everyone simply went. I stood on the deck of the Meridian, watching hundreds of ships gather in formation above Earth. It looked like the entire planet had turned into one single fist, ready to strike. I felt fear, yes, but I felt something else, stronger than fear. I felt certainty. We were not fighting for land, or resources, or power. We were fighting because someone we loved had been hurt, and nothing would stop us from bringing him home. The journey to Ceres took 2 days. During that time, no one talked about turning back. No one questioned the mission. Grace kept the crew focused, running drills, checking systems, making sure every person knew their role. I spent most of those hours thinking about the day Pip had learned to say thank you in 5 different languages, just so he could thank each member of our team individually. I remembered his laugh, high and strange, but full of joy every single time. When we arrived near Ceres, the enemy ship was already waiting. It looked massive compared to our smaller vessels, its hull covered in thick armor plating, clearly built for defense rather than speed. Grace gave the order to hold formation, and every ship around us responded instantly, moving into position without a single mistake. A voice came through on the open channel. It belonged to someone from the Thren Council, calm and confident, telling us to retreat before we made a mistake we could not undo. Grace looked at the screen for a moment, then replied with words I will never forget. You already made that mistake. Now we are going to fix it. The battle that followed was intense, but it did not feel chaotic. Every ship moved with purpose, working together like parts of one machine. Cargo haulers rammed into weaker points of the enemy's defense, while smaller fighters darted around, drawing attention away from our main assault. I watched as 3 tugboats, ships meant only for towing cargo, moved directly toward the enemy vessel and struck it with everything they had, disabling its main weapon system completely. Through it all, I kept my eyes on one thing only: the location of Pip's containment tank, marked in red on our tracking system. Every decision we made was built around reaching that one point safely. Within an hour, the enemy ship's defenses were broken. Grace led a small team, including myself and Oliver, onto the vessel itself. The corridors were narrow and dark, lit only by emergency lighting. We moved quickly, following the signal from Pip's tracker until we reached a large chamber at the center of the ship. There he was, still inside the tank, weaker than before but alive. His eye stalks lifted slightly when he saw us. And even though he could barely speak, he managed to say one word through the communicator attached to his tank. Finally, we worked fast, disconnecting the tank from its power source and preparing it for transport. Oliver carried one side while I carried the other, moving as carefully as possible so we would not cause him any more pain. Grace stayed behind for a moment, speaking with the remaining Thren officers still on board, making it clear that any further harm toward Pip, or any other being under our protection, would not be tolerated. We carried him back to the Meridian, and the moment his tank was secured, our ship's doctor, a woman named Ivy, began treating his injuries immediately. I stood outside the medical room, watching through the glass as Ivy worked carefully, cleaning his burns and adjusting the fluid levels inside his tank to help him heal faster. It took several hours before Ivy finally stepped out and told us he was stable. Relief spread through the entire ship almost instantly. Word traveled fast, and by the time we returned to Earth's orbit, celebrations had already begun across the planet. People gathered outside in city squares, watching live broadcasts, cheering the moment Pip's tank was shown being carried safely into a proper medical facility. I visited him 3 days later, once he was strong enough to speak clearly. He was resting in a private recovery room, his eye stalks now standing tall again, though slower to move than before. When he saw me enter, he smiled in that strange yet familiar way of his, and asked if everyone on the crew was safe. I told him everyone made it back. He closed his eyes for a moment, and then asked a question I had not expected. "Why did you come for me? I am not even from your world." I sat beside him and thought carefully before answering. I told him that he had never once felt like a stranger to us. From the moment we found him, he had been part of our family, and family was something worth protecting no matter where they came from. He stayed quiet for a while, then said something that stayed with me long after that day. "I used to think home was a place. Now I think home is the people who come looking for you when you are lost." Over the following months, what had started as a rescue mission grew into a much larger effort. Other worlds began reaching out to us, some out of curiosity, some out of respect, and some simply because they wanted to understand how an entire species could unite so quickly over the safety of one individual. Leaders from different nations who had never agreed on anything before found themselves working together on new agreements, focused entirely on protecting beings like Pip from ever being harmed again. Grace was promoted to lead a newly formed alliance meant to monitor and respond to any future threats against innocent lives, whether human or otherwise. Oliver decided to stay on as a pilot permanently, saying he had never felt so certain about anything in his life as he did during that mission. Ivy continued her work in medicine, but now focused on treating patients from other worlds as well, learning new methods to help beings whose bodies work differently from our own. As for me, I stayed close to Pip during his recovery, helping him adjust back to life on Earth. He slowly regained his strength, and within a year, he was able to walk on his own again, using a special chair only when his energy ran low. He continued asking questions about everything around him, just as he always had, though now his questions carried a little more depth, a little more understanding of what had happened. One evening, we sat together outside, watching the sunset turn the sky into shades of orange and purple. He turned to me and asked why humans always seemed so calm during sunsets, yet so fierce when someone they loved was in danger. I smiled and told him it was simple. We are calm because we know what peace feels like. We are fierce because we know exactly what we are willing to protect in order to keep it. He nodded slowly, watching the colors fade into the night sky, and for the first time since his rescue, he looked completely at peace. The war we fought was not one we ever wanted, but it taught the entire galaxy something important. It taught them that humanity did not need a single leader, a single language, or even a single reason to unite. All it took was someone we cared about being hurt, and every single one of us would rise together, without hesitation, without doubt, and without ever looking back. And from that day forward, whenever anyone asked why humans were so protective of those they loved, the answer was always the same: because once someone becomes family, distance, species, or differences mean absolutely nothing at all.